Chapter 10, Muscle Tissue, Part 1. So, before I go into Chapter 10, I'm just going to bring up a few concepts from Chapter 9 that will be carrying through directly into this unit. To start with, the whole idea of the lever system as it relates to the human body. So remember, the bones themselves act as the rigid levers. The muscles are what are engaged in generating the force that caused the movement being occurring around the fulcrum or the joint. And of course, the resistance is being whatever it is you're moving, whether it's part of your body or something you're holding with that part of your body. So again, in this lever system, the muscles are the source of the effort, the source of the force causing the movement to occur around the joint or fulcrum. The movements, all the various movements we talked about in Chapter 9 are all going to be brought up again in Chapter 10 and 11 when we talk about what muscles do. We will talk a little bit about the different joints where movements occur. You won't necessarily need to know all the specific structures found in the joints, but if one of these joints is mentioned, you should have a good idea of what occurs there. And so here is just a summary of some of the information about the joints. Glenohumeral joint, head of the humerus, articulates with the glenoid cavity of the scapula, temporal mandibular joint, condylar process of mandible with mandibular fossa of temporal bone, elbow, head of radius and with the trochlear notch of ulna, with the capitulum and trochlea of the humerus, coxal joint, head of femur with acetabulum and valgus coxae, knee, lateral medial condyles of tibia, and articular surface of patella with lateral medial condyles of femur, and then the talocrural joint, the inferior articulating surface of the tibia and medial malleolus with the articulating surface of the talus, the lateral malleolus of the fibula, and the articulating surface of the talus. So again, just remember about these joints. You probably won't be questioned specifically about, what piece of bone is operating at this joint, but remembering the composition of the joints will be really important for the new unit. All right, Chapter 10, Muscle Tissue. Muscle tissue. There are three kinds of muscle tissue. There is the skeletal muscle tissue, the smooth muscle tissue, and the cardiac muscle tissue. And what we will be focusing on primarily is skeletal muscles, and therefore the skeletal muscle tissue. Turns out that there are over 700 individual skeletal muscles in the body. We're not going to learn all of them, but we'll learn a decent number. And the skeletal muscles make up about 40 to 50% of someone's total overall weight. So, what are some functions of muscular tissue? Well, body movement, that's a big one. Attached bones cause movement. We can coordinate these movements. We can have movements only occur in a specific part of the body, pretty nice and localized. Muscles are also involved in the maintenance of posture. There are skeletal muscles along our back that will be contracting constantly at a low level, and they help to maintain our proper posture. And then, of course, there are muscles around joints that may not be putting as much force in movement at that joint, but may just be helping to stabilize the joint, to stabilize the motion. Protection and support. The muscles walls of the abdominal and pelvic cavities, they are going to provide some protection to the organs in the abdominal cavity, in the pelvic cavity. Also help to support those organs, hold them in place. Those organs sometimes are attached to the walls of the abdominal and pelvic cavities. Storage and movement of materials. This is primarily related to smooth muscle tissue in our hollow organs. So they can act as sphincters. It's basically circular muscle bands that go around a hollow organ that can, when contracted, close that area so things cannot pass through, and then can relax or dilate and allow materials to pass through. Heat production. Turns out that muscles, when they contract, generate heat. And so that heat generation actually helps maintain our body temperature. We have a significant proportion of the heat generated that is our body temperature is coming from muscles contracting. And then, of course, in situations where our body temperature gets too low, we can have muscle shiver, which is basically rapid contractions to generate more heat. All right, properties of muscle tissue. Fundamental characteristics common to muscle tissue. First up is excitability. This basically means that the muscle tissues can respond to nervous system and stimuli from the nervous system. So that we say this yellow structure here is a end of an axon for a motor neuron. It's able to release neurotransmitters that will cross over and bind to the muscle tissue, causing the generation of a muscle action potential that will lead to a contraction. So excitability, it can be excited, it will respond to signals from the nervous system. Conductivity. Conductivity is that an electric charge actually moves along the plasma membrane of the muscle. So after those neurotransmitters bind to the muscle surface, that will generate a muscle action potential. This is a current that will travel down the plasma membrane along the length of the muscle cell. So conductivity can carry an electric charge along its plasma membrane. Then there's contractility. Contractility is the ability of a muscle to shorten and in the process of shortening generate force, tension. So muscles contract, they get shorter. When they do that, they will pull on structures leading to tension and force, causing that effort to be generated. Then there's extensibility. Muscles can stretch beyond their normal length to a certain degree without being damaged. So like a rubber band, you can pull on the muscle, pull on the rubber band, and it can stretch. And then elasticity, again, like a rubber band, when you're done stretching or contracting, the rubber band, the muscle will return to its original size and shape. All right, here is a cartoon of a muscle organ. The muscle organ attached by a tendon to a bone, the most common way muscles are attached to structures, skeletal muscles. So the red part where all the muscle fibers are, that is called the muscle belly, and that's attached by tendon to the bone. If we take a close look up at the muscle belly, we see that it is made up of these long column-shaped structures called fascicles. And so you see there are lots and lots of fascicles all bundled up inside of the muscle organ. Also found within the muscle organ are blood vessels and nerves. These are referred to as neurovascular bundles. You have an artery, you have a vein, you have a somatic motor neuron. You see lots of those also found in the muscle. Now, if you take a fascicle, and here's a fascicle, and look inside of it, you see that it is made up of lots of muscle fibers. So there are lots of muscle fibers bundled up into the fascicle, lots of fascicles bundled up into the muscle organ. And the bundles continue from there. We look at an individual muscle fiber or muscle cell. We see that within it are these long column-shaped protein structures called myofibrils. And the myofibrils are made up of lots and lots of individual protein fibers called myofilaments. So bundles of myofilaments make up the myofibril. Bundles of myofibrils are found in a muscle fiber. Bundles of muscle fibers are found in a fascicle, and bundles of fascicles make up the muscle organ. Bundles of bundles of bundles. There's also connective tissue associated with the muscle organ. There's a sheet of areolar connective tissue that wraps around every muscle fiber. So every single skeletal muscle cell has a layer of areolar connective tissue wrapped around it. That is called the endomysium. And the endomysium is important because it helps to electrically insulate the muscle fibers and bind the muscle fibers together. So they're held together and insulated so that if one of them is carrying a charge, it doesn't affect a neighboring muscle cell. Then wrapped around each fascicle is a sheet of dense regular connective tissue called the perimysium. So a perimysium is a sheet of dense connective tissue around the fascicle. It helps to contain muscles, cells all together, as well as blood vessels and nerves within the fascicle. And then from here, we move on to the epimysium. And the epimysium is a sheet of dense, irregular connective tissue that then surrounds the entire muscle, holding all the fascicles together and also additional blood vessels and nerves. So 3 layers of connective tissue: endomysium around each muscle fiber, perimysium around each fascicle, and epimysium around each skeletal muscle. Then, of course, we have the tendon. The tendon is made of dense, regular connective tissue, and the tendon actually is a fusion of the 3 categories of connective tissue within the muscle organ, so that it's actually a continuous structure running through the muscle organ. The tendon, of course, then attaches to the bone, in most cases bone, and the collagen fibers within the tendon actually not only pierce the periosteum, but goes into the bone tissue itself. So it is structurally attached to the bone directly. So very powerful connection between the tendon and the bone. There are, of course, some other important connective tissue structures. We have the deep fascia. Deep fascia is dense, irregular connective tissue that separates individual muscles. So this is also wrapping around muscles and separating them from each other so they can contract and move independently of each other. Sometimes it also helps to bind together muscles with similar functions. So there's deep fascia keeping the hamstring muscles all together in our leg, for instance. And then we have the superficial fascia. This is a layer of areolar and adipose connective tissue that helps to connect the skin to the muscles. Yes, that means it's also known as the subcutaneous layer or the hypodermis. So it is part of the integumentary system, but it is important to keep the skin attached to underlying structures, which then lead to the muscles. All right, muscle cell development. So when we're talking about skeletal muscle cells or skeletal muscle fibers, they originally were myoblasts. Myoblasts were stem cells that only become one thing, and that is skeletal muscle fibers. And the way they do that is they fuse together, and as they fuse together, they become an extremely long column-shaped cell. And within the cell are lots and lots of nuclei. So the reason why skeletal muscle fibers have multiple nucleuses is because they were originally lots of different stem cells, lots of different myoblasts. Now, most of the myoblasts become skeletal muscle fibers. We have very few stem cells, myoblasts remaining in our muscles. The few that remain are called satellite cells. So a satellite cell is basically a myoblast that still exists in our muscles. Not a lot of them, so they can only manage minor repairs to damaged skeletal muscles. All right, and then the skeletal muscle fiber itself has some anatomy terms specific to itself. Some of these are basically new names for old structures. So for instance, the plasma membrane of the muscle fiber, the plasma membrane is known as the sarcolemma. Plasma membrane is now sarcolemma. And then the fluid within the skeletal muscle fiber is now called the sarcoplasm. So the cytosol, the fluid within the muscle fiber, is a little different from normal cytosol in that it has higher levels of glycogen and myoglobin, which binds to oxygen, and it is called sarcoplasm. And then, of course, these protein columns made of myofilaments are the contractile elements of muscle fibers. So it's these cylindrical rods running the length of the muscle fiber that will get shorter, that will lead to the actual contractions. And that is it for this part of the lecture.